and I was born in Chelm, Poland, April 1st, 1920. My original name was Janko Kipperberg. When in Poland, my dad was part of the last of the classical immigrants. He came to this country in 1923, and 7 years later he sent for us. When we were living in Poland and Chelm, kind of humorous, we were known as the Americana because Dad would send us some money. And in Poland we lived in an apartment complex, both Poles and Jews. And we got along, we had Polish neighbors and so on. But even as a child of 8 or 9, I knew we and they. We were Jews and they were Poles, although technically we were all Poles. We were culturally apart. And 1929, we came to this country. My mother, my brother Sam, and I. We left Chelm, we went to Warsaw, and from Warsaw we went to Bremen and Bremerhaven. Then we took a boat to England where we had a ship and we came to the port of New York. We didn't go to Ellis Island because my dad was a citizen and we came as his wife and his children. When we got to New York, we were met by the Hayats, and they took care of us and put us on the train from New York to Omaha. One experience I remember on the train was the first time I'd seen a black. It was quite an experience for me. When we got to Omaha, in the train station, my dad wasn't there. There was a mix-up in train schedules. So my mother, even though she didn't speak English, was able to get a taxi driver, point to the address, and we came to Dad's store. And Dad was just getting ready to greet us. We came in the store. I recognized my dad because we had pictures and my mother told me about him. And then we lived in the back of the store, and we were the typical family grocery store, independent grocery store. At that time in Omaha, a lot of the small independent grocery stores were from recent Jewish immigrants. The only chain store at that time was the Piggly Wiggly.
When you first came here, Jack, did you speak anything other than Yiddish?
No, I spoke Yiddish and I could understand a little Polish, but I've forgotten Polish. But even my Yiddish now is limited, gehakt. When I was 9 years old, although they put me in the first grade, the Mason School, they gave us special support, and we picked up the language real fast, and especially when I played with the other kids, because the only other immigrants in Mason were a few Polish children. Being South Omaha, there was a large immigration of Poles that worked in the packing houses.
When you first came here, what grade did you start in?
First grade, and then about a year later they put me in the appropriate grade for my age.
Did you feel awkward at that time, being a little older with the first graders?
No, not particular, because I adapted to it. And then they also gave me special training with a speech teacher, because we had a tendency, Sam and myself, to mix our V's and W's. And I remember one sentence was, the Vikings were very venturesome.
What do you remember about your early days of coming to Omaha?
Well, what I remember is the grocery store, and I also became aware of 1929 of the Depression, because although we as a family had enough to eat and so on, a lot of people would come into the store and Dad would give them a sandwich. And I noticed that Dad, when he'd give them a sandwich, he wouldn't encourage them to schmooze and talk. And one time, I made a sandwich and I gave it to this guy, and I kept the conversation short, and the guy felt hurt, and my dad got after me. He says, "You're a kid, you're not supposed to do that." And also people used to come in the back door of the house and ask for food. Another incident I remember about the Depression, well, actually two. One, a fellow came in and he noticed my dad was having trouble with his cash register. And he said that he used to work in a cash register company. My dad got a little nervous. He thought he was going to hold him up. So Dad took the cash register out and he fixed it, and Dad gave him a couple of bucks. The other thing is, a lot of the people would charge their groceries. And if they'd run up a bill, they'd stop coming in. And Dad wasn't too upset with that but what upset him that they would quit coming to his store and pay him cash later on. And that really upset him.
Now, you had relatives in Omaha when you came here, didn't you, Jack?
Yes, my Uncle Harry, and Uncle Harry came to this country in 1914, and that's the reason my dad came to Omaha. One story about my Uncle Harry, and I don't know how accurate it is, but the story is, originally he came to New York. He was a bricklayer, and it was supposed to be an arranged marriage. But when he looked the situation over, he didn't care, and he wanted to leave New York, and he knew there were some landsmen from that small town of Rosich in Omaha, and that's the way the Coopers landed in Omaha. And another thing about my dad was raised in Russia. At that time, Russia was split up between Austria and Russia, and he lived in the Russian part, but it was a German colony, and he learned German. And when the war broke out, he was in the Russian army, and he was taken prisoner by the Austrians, but what he told me saved his life. He could speak German, and they put him in the officers' mess, to work there. And that's my dad, it saved his life. The other thing, my dad coming from Eastern Europe was amazed. Now this is World War I. The way the Jews were treated in Germany and Austria. They were very affluent. The first time he'd ever seen a Jewish military officer was in the German-Austrian army. Of course, there was some anti-Semitism. But one Christmas, one of the Gentile officers made a snide remark to a Jewish officer, and the next day he brought him up on charges. And the charge, "You insulted my religion." And for my dad, he was amazed that such things could happen. And this guy was brought up on charge. Also, they would, being that the Germans and Austrians had Turkish troops, they would have kosher food for them. And that amazed my dad too.
Because of them being Muslims?
And the fact they went to the trouble to furnish kosher food. They didn't do it for the Russians didn't do it for the Jewish soldiers.
How did your father get to Chelm?
He got to Chelm because when he was taken prisoner, Chelm had an Austrian, German encampment, and that's where he was a prisoner of war.
Was he there very long?
Well, he went in 1914, so he must have been, 3 or 4 years. He was there during the war and then after the war, and he left Poland for the United States in 1923. And he left a wife and 2 kids, which was typical immigrant situation. And we were very fortunate that Dad was able to bring us over 1929, because if he, like some, if he'd have waited 3, 4 years into the 30s, we probably never would have come, because by that time the Nazis were all over, and even before they invaded Poland, they influenced. So God knows what our destiny would have been.
How did your mother and dad meet, Jack? Do you have any idea?
Well, not exactly, but one story my dad tells me. One Friday, he was walking along the street, and one in the basement, he heard a Jewish family having Friday night service, and the melody, the ningin, and then he decided to propose to my mother. Anyway, that's the story. My mother worked in a candy store, and when I was 8 or 9, when she told me the story, I got upset with her. I said, "Why didn't you save me any candy?" But, just part of the family folklore.
What year did your parents marry?
Well, they must have married well, I was born in 1920, so 1919.
Did your father have any other siblings other than your Uncle Harry?
He had a sister who stayed in Poland and then and in Russia, and then he had a brother that died when he was real young. But we've pretty well lost contact. My mother had 2 brothers and a sister. I remember her sister Zelda. The 2 brothers had left, like it was typical, they went to France. And I met one of them, he came to the United States to visit us. But we have very little contact. The only contact we have is Zelda's daughter married a GI, and she lives in Florida.
So have you maintained contact with her?
Minimal. We send her, Russia Sugar cards and things of that nature.
What are some of your earlier recollections of being in Omaha, Jack, as a young boy in a foreign land?
Well, I don't think too much of myself as a foreigner. I enjoyed the city at that time. Even children my age were allowed to travel by themselves. I used to go downtown and go to the movies for 25 cents and buy popcorn for 5 cents. But the thing is, growing up, from 10 into my early teenage years, there was a lot more freedom than teenagers have now. And in retrospect, I appreciate it.
Where did you first live when you came to this country?
Well, we lived in the back of the store.
And where was that located?
On 21st Avenue, and then moved up on Leavenworth, and because there we lived in an apartment above the store, and of course then when the war broke out, I went and joined the army, and I was in the port battalion, and we set up communication some of the ports in Great Britain, and from there we went to Belgium, and from Belgium we went to Germany, Antwerp, Bremen and Antwerp, and we set up communications there, and that's where I was when the war ended.
When did you get out of the service?
I got out in 1945 at the end of the war. We came back to Omaha, and I worked as an electrician's helper. And then, the curious thing, my brother Gail, he belonged to the Air Force Reserve, and they said they needed ground radio men, and he encouraged me to join. So when the Korean War broke out, me being a bachelor, I had no excuse, and I went into they called me out, but Gail was married, and I think he had a child. He didn't go. And my mother, God bless her memory, didn't talk to him for a year. because she was upset that he talked me into it. It wasn't his fault because I I wasn't euphoric about the military, but I didn't object to the military life like some people did. But in the Korean War, I didn't go overseas. I was stationed in Florida and in Georgia, and I was in about 18 months. And then when the war ended, I got discharged, came back to Omaha, and then I went down to Dallas to work for Collins Radio. And one of the best things that happened about going down to Texas and Dallas is there was Sam met Judy, and where I met my wife, and it was over the sheriff.
Tell me about Mason Grade School, where you went to school.
Well, Mason grade school was essentially a working man's grade school, you know, most of the families. And we got along with the different kids. We, one thing I remember about Mason, South Omaha had some union problems because they were organizing, and they had to call out some National Guard. And I remember on the Mason school property, they had machine guns set up, and you know, it's something that sticks in your mind. But we'd walk to school, and it was about 10 blocks, but everybody else walked to school, so it was normal.
And then back home for lunch, and then back to school.
No, we walked back for lunch, and then we walked, you know, when school was out. And then, of course, I went from grade school. I went to Central High for a year, and then I had some changes, and I went up to Tech High, where I got my high school diploma, and it was a training as an electrician. And it was kind of interesting because I was the token yin, but I enjoyed it. The only thing about work, you know, young people ask me now, is what you're doing meaningful and so on. I enjoyed my work, but I never was euphoric about it. In other words, I didn't knock, when I was working for Collins, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the structure, but I didn't knock every day and say, let me in so I can turn dials. One thing about working for a company like Collins and Rockwell, there was established rules of conduct between myself and management, and it didn't get to be personal. And I found that a lot easier from what I heard from other people that worked for smaller outfits or for family outfits, and it swung both ways. That get intimate, you know, go to supper with them, and then have an argument the next month. Working for a big company like this, there was structured relationship, and I guess it's part of my personality, and I got along real good. But it was kind of humorous. Like I say, even at Collins in the early years, I was a token Jew, and Dallas has a lot of Baptist, hard shell Baptist, and there was some humor about it. This one guy says, "You're Jewish?" And I say, "Yes." He says, "You must have gone broke 3 times. I say, "What do you mean?" He says, "You know, it's a fact that Jewish people, the community lets them go broke 3 times, and they help them out. But after the 3rd time, they don't help them."
Exactly what kind of work did you do for Collins?
Well, I was a test equipment technician, and I worked on their test equipment, and then I would come in contact with people on the production line because they'd have some equipment. But the thing is about electronics, I've been retired about 12 years, and it's changed so much in the last 12 years. I go back to tube-type radios and stuff, and slide rules. And when I show it to technicians, engineers now, it's antiques.
That's true. What year did you say you graduated from high school?
uh, let's see, I came in 29, and then 8, and I guess 1940, right around there.
Did you work in the store before you went into the service?
No, once I got out of high school, I worked for different electrician. But when I was in grade school and in high school, I worked in that store, which was typical of that generation, you know. And it kept me from out of trouble with running around with the other people. Another thing I remember about the store, Dad had candy, and I would try to indulge myself, and he would discourage me. So whenever I got a few pennies, I'd go to a competitor store and buy candy. You know, in that period, in Omaha, in a small town, they were what they called the Jews of Main Street. Small Jewish communities, but they had small independent stores here in Dallas and in Nebraska. But now it's pretty well disappeared because usually the children went to college and they went to the big cities. So when you go to these small communities, there's all this history and legends of the Jews that live there. In Texas, when I go to a small town, there's always synagogues, and they're preserved, but there's no community there. And the few Jews that are left there are senior citizens. So that's another thing. We call ourselves senior citizens. When I was a child, there were young people and middle-aged and old people. But now we're not. We're senior citizens.
Did you take your job with Collins right after school, after the service?
No, when I came back from the Korean being in service, I came back to Omaha, and I worked a couple of years at various jobs, and then I decided to go to Dallas. One reason because my cousin John was there. Now when I went down there, and I looked around for different jobs, and I got a job at Collins Radio, which is kind of curious because the main office was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. That's what the founding of Collins Radio. But it's a good thing I went down there. And now that I've been down there almost 52 years, I've gotten my citizenship paper. I'm a citizen of Texas.
How many years in all did you work for Collins?
33 years. And that, I think, is a rather unique experience for people of my age compared to people now. I worked there 33 years, kept my nose clean, and got retirement. Now, typically, people work in several factories. Although Collins, the division I was in, was bought out by Rockwell, and then when I retired, it was Alcatel. But we mostly worked on microwave communication, not microwave ovens, because people ask me, and I can't fix them.
Do you still tinker a little bit with electrical things?
Yeah, but not too much. The thing is, like I said before, electronics has changed so much. And as far as computers and things like this, my wife is into it. She communicates with, and I don't involve. I know the binary code, and that's about it. Also, as far as computers, when I was younger, there used to be ham widows. In other words, if a guy was a ham radio, he'd come home, say hello to his wife, and get on his ham radio. Now we have a computer widowers. When my wife comes home from work, says hello, and she goes in and she communicates with people all over the world. But it's okay.
How did you meet Susie?
Well, I was kind of curious. Susan was working with a wife of a friend of mine that I knew at work, and this friend of mine, we were friends. I'd go over there, have dinner with him, and he says, you know, we know this nice Jewish girl. We'd like you to meet her. So I said, okay. Then they told me her age, and I said, you know, she's kind of young for me. So I tried to set it up with another father living in the apartment. And he said yes, and then he backed out. So I figured I better do the right thing by a Jewish girl. And we met, and it went on. It was for sure. But I never expect to marry a rabbi's daughter, which is quite an education for me.
Tell me about your children, Jack.
Well, I have two daughters, Rachel and Heidi. Rachel lives in Austin. She was recently married, very happily, and she took a degree in geography, and she's looking for a job, which I'm because in urban renewal where they use geographers. Heidi's going to school of medicine in Wisconsin, and she's going there for a doctorate, and she wants to teach at the university history, theater history. And she's got about a year and a half now. And the truth of the matter, I'm ready to be a grandfather, which is another interesting thing about being Jewish and a place like Dallas and working in college. When I was working in college, I was also, besides being the resident Jew at the time, I was the resident bachelor. And they said, you get married, Coop? I said, yeah. And this guy I knew was a knowledgeable Baptist. I said, you know, that's very natural. He said, you know, you're pretty old to get married. He says, what do you mean? I said, you know, I'm a descendant of the patriarchs. He says, yes. I said, the patriarchs always were late bloomers. And you know, he right away knew what I was talking about, which is more than some of my Jewish friends caught up.
So your years between Helm and Omaha and Dallas have been exciting times, haven't they, Jack?
Yes, yes, I enjoyed it. And I'm a person that usually don't have swing of moods like some people. I enjoy things, but I don't get euphoric, but I don't get depressed either. So I'm satisfied. You know, I'm lucky with my personality.
What kind of work does your son-in-law do?
He's a physical therapist, and he takes clients at home, and he also teaches. And, you know, like a father-in-law says, what can you, from this you can make a living, but I think in time he'll do all right. The thing is, Rachel needs to find a permanent job, because nowadays, when you work for wages, more than the wages, what's important are the fringe benefits. And of course, the fringe benefits are being cut back, but at least you have some.
And how have the girls been? Have they been good students?
Yes, very good. Heidi especially. Rachel's been a good student too, but she's sort of laid back. But Heidi is a serious, honest student, the whole Megillah.
That's good. So I take it by what you said, you're proud of Sue and you're proud of the girls.
Oh yes, yes. You know, I've had a lot of models.
Tell me about your brothers.
Well, Sam was 2 years younger than me, and David was 10 years younger than me. But the curious thing, David and me look alike, and David and me, our personalities are the same. In fact, one time when David came to Dallas and the kids were small and they were in the evening they were looking and they ran up to David because they thought it was their father. Sam's personality is a little different, and his career has been different, an attorney and a lawyer. and we've always gotten along. We've never had any arguments about your issue because there's never been too much, which is a lucky thing. Because I've known families who got along, and when it came to estates, they'd break up. So we've never had that trouble. These are my folks, Martin and Ida Cooper, of blessed memory, and they were good parents, and my dad really helped saved us by bringing us to this country in 1929. God bless them. This is my grandfather, Yaakov Kipperberg, and he lived in Rosish, and he was his life work. He worked as a forester. This is my grandmother, Gittel Kipperberg of blessed memory. Neither my grandfather or my grandmother I ever met, and I really know very little about their history.
Okay. My name is Susan Carol Turitz Cooper. My Hebrew name is Shoshana Kavat Salel Bat Harav Eliezer Va'ita. I was born April 16, 1941 in Bradford, Pennsylvania, but I grew up, I lived in Decatur for 18 years, in Decatur, Illinois. I married Jack about, 35 years ago. We just celebrated our 35th anniversary. And I'm very blessed to be a member of the Cooper family. I've known that all along, and every time we get together, I feel even more and more blessed to be a Cooper, to be a part of this family. Jack and I met in Decatur, and I'm convinced that it was Bashert.
Not in Decatur.
Excuse me, we met in Dallas. We live in Dallas, and I'm convinced that it was Bashert. We were introduced by mutual friends, and we dated for quite a while, and the more we dated, the more I realized that I did love Jack. I truly loved Jack. But he wasn't taking any initiative. So on one of our dates, we came back from the International House of Pancakes. It was a lovely summer evening. And I said, Jack, I love you. This was under a streetlight on the way home. And he kissed me and he said, I love you too. Now let's go back to your place and talk business. And that's how we became engaged. My family loved Jack. My Zadie adored Jack and kept going around the house singing Chassan Kala Mazel Tov. So I knew it was okay.
Tell me a little about your parents, Susie.
My mother was born in Kalenkovich, Russia, in 1917. She came over here when she was probably two years old. She was smuggled out with her mother and her mother, my Bubby Rosie, was pregnant with my mother's sister. My mother never knew her father really well, but her father was Charles Bezalel Menowitz. He was a merchant, a very successful merchant in Russia, but he died of typhoid before my mother was 2, so she never really got to know him. I'm named for him. My middle name, Carol Bezalel, is for him. She came to the United States when she was about 2 years old. Her mother couldn't get in on the United States quota. Let's back up a little bit. While they were in Russia, my mother met now my Zadie Abby Goldberg. Zadie Abey was in the movies behind my Bubby Rosie, and he was throwing peanuts at her. She turned around and asked him to please stop, and he fell in love with her. Um, he, he knew that she was a mother and, you know, had a little one on the way, but he loved her passionately, and he followed her all the way to Argentina. Uh, since they couldn't get in on the United States quota, he followed her all the way to Argentina, and he married her there. In the meantime, my mother came to the United States, let's say approximately 1920, 21, with my great-grandparents, my Zadie Zushin Perpichnikov, for whom I'm named, and Bubby Leah. And Bubby Leah and Zadie Zushin raised them. Zadie Zushin was a Hasidic Rebbe, I think in the Bronx. So my mother grew up in New York. About the sequence of events is a little bit confusing to me, but I suppose about 3 to 4 years later, Bubby, Rosie, and Zadie Abey came to the Bronx from Argentina on Argentine passports. And it was really the first time that my mother met her adoptive father. But they had two more, Bubby, Rosie, and Zadie Abey had two more children, and he's also my Zadie. And he raised all 4 daughters as if they were his own. It's really, to me, the love story of the century. So my mother grew up in New York. My father was born in Chicago of Lithuanian parents, Louis and Flora Turitz. Eventually they moved to Rock Island, Illinois, with my father's sister, Lucille. My father was raised Orthodox. My Zadie used to walk to the 9th Street Shul in Rock Island. They became a well-known family. Zadie had a very popular little tailor shop. Bubby was active in Pioneer Women. But when he was a teenager, he took a bus over to Davenport, Iowa. My father had a very good Hebrew background because he went to Cheder after public school. But it was his first contact with the Reform movement. The rabbi there realized that my father had a superior Hebrew background and encouraged him to become a rabbi, and it hadn't really crossed Daddy's mind to do so. I'm not sure what he would have done otherwise, possibly medicine. But the Sisterhood of the Temple in Davenport, Iowa, gave my father a $100 scholarship, and that enabled him to go to the Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. Supported by Sisterhood scholarships, he went to the Hebrew Union College for his rabbinical degree and the University of Cincinnati concurrently. All right, how did my parents meet? My mother didn't really know, as I said, her birth father's family, but she had an aunt who lived in Cincinnati, and she went to visit this aunt in Cincinnati for 6 months. And she had nothing to do during the day, so my aunt said, why don't you go to the Jewish Community Center and do something, keep busy. So my mother enrolled in a Yiddish class. My mother's fluent in Yiddish. It was her first language, but she didn't know how to read or write in Yiddish, and my father was her teacher. They married. My mother still can't read or write in Yiddish, but my father proposed to my mother. They were married in Aunt Ida and Uncle Ben's home by one of my father's professors 2 days after my father's ordination. They've been married for 65 years. My father's the congregation where he spent the most time was in Decatur, Illinois. I suppose I was about 4.5, 5 years old when we moved there, so that's where I grew up and went to elementary school and high school. Daddy always preferred small congregations. He was a small town boy, and he liked to know his congregants, his involvement, and his involvement with his congregants was very deep, very personal, very loving, very caring. It's as though they were his kinderlach. So I'm very blessed that we grew up in a small town congregation. Of course, a town like Decatur, Illinois doesn't have many of the Jewish advantages that a big city would have. But on the other hand, it was a blessing to grow up in a small town where we became part of the congregational family, where we knew and cared about each other. And after all these years, we are still in touch with each other. We email, we write to each other, congregants call my parents. It was an extraordinary congregation, and even more extraordinary because it was combination Orthodox and Reform. It was founded as an Orthodox congregation, and yet the older people in their wisdom realized the direction in which the congregation was going, and it was a beautiful, it was a beautiful, not compromise, but a way to work things out for the congregation to be truly Orthodox and truly Reform at the same time. I have two sisters. Laura is the youngest, born in 1949. My sister Rhoda was born in 1945 in Rock Island, Illinois. And we were active in NIFTY. And of course we had to be active in NIFTY. The reason we had to be active in NIFTY is that we wouldn't think of doing it any other way. In a small town where there may be a dozen, 16 teenagers, we needed each other, but even more so, we needed to get acquainted with Jewish teenagers in other parts of Illinois and St. Louis, Iowa. So NIFTY was very important to us. I didn't realize at the time, I just found out about 10 years ago, that my father was one of the founders of NIFTY. I'm rambling a little bit, but I do want to tell you about this. He didn't really mean to plant a national organization. He wasn't really thinking that big, and yet he planted a seed that grew into an organization that has benefited probably over 60,000 Jewish teenagers who have become active in their congregations, rabbis, youth directors, educators, and so forth. The way this began is that he was kind of concerned about his teenagers in a small town like Bradford, Pennsylvania. So he called his friend Rabbi Sam Cook in Altoona and said, "Sam, let's get our kids together." My father organized the first NIFTY conclave. He asked Sisterhood to help out and support him, and that was the seed that planted a huge national Jewish youth movement, National Federation of Temple Youth. So what else would we be but active in NIFTY? I went to the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I majored in elementary education and Spanish. I was actually hoping to be a Spanish teacher to young students, but that didn't prove to be the case. What else can I tell you? Ramble.
I want you to tell me a little bit about the life you and Jack have had together.
We've had a happy life. I can't imagine being more happily married or being more in love than I am with Jack. He's been a wonderful husband, a blessing.
Excuse me, I agree.
He gave me two beautiful, kind, sweet, intelligent, caring daughters. We have a wonderful life in Dallas. We have a lovely circle of friends who are like family to us, since we don't actually have family in Dallas. We belong to two congregations, we belong to Congregation Beth Torah, which is conservative. And recently, about 5 years ago, we joined Temple Emmanuel, one of the biggest congregations in the Reform movement. But it's turned out to be a very exciting Jewish adventure for us, belonging to both congregations, balancing our lives, having two circles of friends.
We're ecumenical.
That's ecumenical. We feel like anything that happens at Temple Emmanuel, we're right in the current and flow of what's happening in the Reform movement. I've been active in sisterhood, and Jack supports me in all of my activities. I like to read Torah at both congregations. This is a skill that I'm particularly proud of, learning to read Torah. Also, I'd like to add that up until recently, I was a bar and bat mitzvah tutor at Beth Torah and at also one of the smaller Reform temples. This is something that I enjoyed completely. I loved the one-on-one teaching with my students. I felt I had so much more to give them than just the mechanical teaching of Haftorah and Torah. I loved sitting around the dining room table with them, drinking tea and studying with them, and just talking about things Jewish, what's on their minds, what I have to share with them. Sometimes there was an interesting revelation for them if they came from the conservative, if I was teaching a conservative student, why I'm a Reform Jew, how we think alike, how we think differently, that we're all a part of Kalal Yisrael. So teaching was very, very gratifying to me.
How would you sum up your life in just one sentence?
At this point, well, you're asking me at a time when I'm in Omaha and we just celebrated a Simcha, Sam and Judy's 50th anniversary, and family came in from South Africa. And family, Simcha, love, caring, it's really what life is all about. It's the way life is meant to be.